On a freezing December night, billionaire CEO Kofi Mensah stepped over countless homeless people without a second glance. But when he saw her, a girl in a torn red coat clutching a worn notebook, something stopped him cold. He had no idea this one moment would destroy everything he thought he knew about love. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our life-changing stories. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. Now, let's begin. Let me tell you about a winter night that changed two lives forever. This is a story about Kofi Mensah, a man who had everything money could buy, but nothing his heart truly needed. And this is a story about Amara, a girl who had lost everything except her will to dream. Kofi Mensah was 35 years old and owned half of the tech industry in the city. His company developed software that ran in offices across 3 continents. People whispered his name in boardrooms with a mixture of respect and fear. He wore expensive suits in shades of charcoal gray and drove cars that cost more than most people's houses. His penthouse apartment sat on the 42nd floor with windows that overlooked the entire city. But inside those walls, the silence was deafening. Success had been his only companion for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to share his life with another human being. His assistant, Nadine, managed every minute of his day like a military operation. Meetings, conference calls, business dinners with people who smiled too wide and laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny. Kofi moved through his days like a machine, efficient and cold. He told himself he was happy. He told himself this was what winning looked like. It was late December when everything changed. The city was buried under snow and ice, and the wind cut through the streets like broken glass. Kofi was leaving his office after another 16-hour workday, his mind already racing through tomorrow's merger presentation. The sidewalks were crowded with holiday shoppers, their arms full of bags and their faces bright with excitement. And there, scattered between the festive chaos, were the forgotten ones. Homeless people huddled in doorways, wrapped in dirty blankets, their cups extended hopefully toward the passing crowds. Kofi had walked past these people 1,000 times. He'd trained himself not to see them, not to feel anything. They were part of the city's landscape, like the buildings and the traffic lights. Not his problem, not his responsibility. But then he saw her. She was sitting against the wall of an old bookstore, her back straight despite the cold that must have been seeping through her thin red coat. The coat was torn at the shoulder, and her jeans were worn through at the knees. But it wasn't her clothes that made Kofi stop. It was what she was doing. While everyone around her begged for change or slept under layers of cardboard, this girl was writing. She had a battered notebook balanced on her knees and a pencil moving across the page with fierce concentration. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face held an expression of such complete focus that the chaos of the street seemed to disappear around her. Their eyes met for just a second. Hers were deep brown, bright with intelligence, and something else, something that looked like defiance. She didn't look away. She didn't lower her gaze or extend her hand for money. She just looked at him like she could see straight through his expensive suit to the hollow place inside his chest. Kofi walked on. He made it halfway down the block before he stopped. He stood there in the falling snow, businessmen and women flowing around him like water around a stone, and he couldn't shake the image of those eyes. He couldn't stop thinking about that girl writing her secrets while the world ignored her. He told himself to keep walking. He told himself it was none of his business, but his feet carried him back anyway. The next morning, Kofi left his office early and stopped at the coffee shop on the corner. He bought 2 large coffees and a bag of pastries, feeling ridiculous the entire time. What was he doing? But he couldn't seem to stop himself. She was there, in the same spot, writing in that same notebook. When his shadow fell across her page, she looked up with suspicion in her eyes. "I brought coffee," Kofi said, and immediately felt like an idiot. "If you want it." The girl studied him for a long moment. "I don't take charity," she said. Her voice was soft but firm, with an accent that spoke of a childhood spent somewhere warm and far from this frozen city. "It's not charity," Kofi heard himself say. "It's coffee. I bought too much." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "That's the worst lie I've heard all week. And I've heard some pretty bad ones." But she took the coffee anyway, wrapping her cold fingers around the cup. "Thank you." Kofi sat down beside her, not caring that the sidewalk was dirty and cold. "What are you writing?" She hesitated, then showed him the page. It was a poem about the city, about the way people moved through their lives like ghosts, seeing but not really seeing, living but not really alive. The words were raw and beautiful, and they hit Kofi somewhere deep in his chest. "You're talented," he said quietly. "I'm Amara," she replied. That was the beginning. Kofi started coming back every morning with coffee and breakfast. At first, Amara was guarded, suspicious of his motives. But slowly, day by day, she began to open up. She told him about her life in careful pieces, like she was handing over fragments of broken glass. She was 23 years old. She'd grown up in a small town with her parents, Kwame and Nia, who had worked hard to send her to college. She'd been studying literature, dreaming of becoming a writer. Then, 6 months ago, her parents had died in a car accident on a rainy highway. In one terrible moment, everything had been taken from her. The grief had swallowed her whole. She'd lost her scholarship, couldn't afford her apartment, couldn't hold down a job while her world was falling apart. The street had become her home, and that notebook had become her only friend. But Amara wasn't broken. That was what amazed Kofi. She'd lost everything, but she still woke up every morning and wrote her poems and observed the world with those bright, intelligent eyes. She challenged him when he talked about business like it was the only thing that mattered. She made him laugh with her observations about the absurdity of the wealthy people who walked past her every day, so absorbed in their phones they didn't even see the sky. "You're lonely," she told him one morning, about 2 weeks after they'd met. "You have all that money and all that success, but you're just as homeless as I am. You just have a nicer roof over your head." Her words cut through him like a knife, sharp and true. Kofi had spent years building walls around his heart, and this girl with nothing to her name had seen through them in minutes. He offered to help her. He wanted to get her off the street, wanted to give her a chance. But Amara was proud. She didn't want handouts. She didn't want to be someone's charity project. "I want to earn my own way," she said firmly. "I want to build something that's mine." So Kofi made her an offer. His company needed creative content writers, people who could tell stories that connected with real human beings. Would she be willing to try? He'd give her a fair shot, a real job, not a pity position. If she was good enough, she'd earn her place. If not, they'd part ways with no hard feelings. Amara looked at him for a long time, searching his face for deception. Finally, she nodded. Kofi took her shopping for professional clothes. She chose a simple gray suit and white blouse, nothing flashy, nothing that would make her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. He helped her find a small studio apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was modest, just one room with a tiny kitchen and a bathroom, But when Amara walked in and saw the bed and the desk by the window, tears filled her eyes. "I'll pay you back," she whispered. "Every cent, I promise." "I know you will," Kofi said, and he meant it. Amara threw herself into the work with a passion that surprised everyone in the office. Her ideas were fresh and honest, cutting through the corporate jargon that usually filled their campaigns. She wrote content that made people feel something real. Within weeks, she'd impressed the entire creative department. The campaigns she worked on saw engagement rates that broke company records. Kofi watched her from his office, pride swelling in his chest. But it was more than pride. Somewhere along the way, between those morning coffees on the cold sidewalk and late nights working on presentations, he'd started to fall in love with her. He tried to fight it. He told himself it was inappropriate, that there was a power dynamic that made any relationship impossible. He was her boss. He'd been the one to lift her out of poverty. How could anything between them be real when the foundation was so unequal? But his heart didn't care about logic. Every time Amara laughed at something ridiculous in a meeting, every time she pushed her hair behind her ear while she was concentrating, every time she challenged his ideas with that fierce intelligence, he fell a little bit more. And he could tell she felt it too. The way her eyes lingered on him when she thought he wasn't looking. The way her voice softened when they were alone. The electricity that sparked between them when their hands accidentally touched while reaching for the same document. They were both trying so hard to maintain professional distance, but the pull between them was becoming impossible to resist. Then Kioma arrived. Kioma Okonkwo was Kofi's ex-fiancée, a woman from one of the wealthiest families in the country. They'd been engaged 3 years ago, but she'd left him for a man with even more money, even more status. Kofi had told himself he didn't care, that he was better off alone. But the truth was, Kioma had wounded something in him, had confirmed his belief that love was just another transaction. Now she was back, gliding into his office in a designer dress the color of cream, her smile perfect and predatory. Her previous relationship had ended badly, and suddenly Kofi looked appealing again. She wanted him back, wanted the power and prestige that came with being Mrs. Kofi Mensah. When she saw Amara, something ugly flashed in her eyes. Within days, she'd done her research. She knew exactly who Amara was and where she'd come from, and she used that information like a weapon. The headlines appeared on a Friday morning. Billionaire's Homeless Project. CEO's charity case girlfriend. The articles were cruel and mocking, painting Amara as a desperate girl who'd seduced her way into a job, and Kofi as either a naive fool or a man who got his kicks playing savior to the downtrodden. Amara saw the articles before Kofi did. When he arrived at the office, she was waiting in his conference room, her face pale and her eyes bright with unshed tears and fury. "Was I just a project to you?" she demanded. Her voice shook. "Some kind of experiment? Poor homeless girl makes good? Film at 11? Amara, no. Did you ever actually care about me? Or was I just a way for you to feel better about yourself? The generous billionaire saving the poor girl from the street?" "That's not fair," Kofi said, his own anger rising. "You know that's not what this was." "Do I?" Amara's voice broke. "How can I know anything? You have all the power here, Kofi. You gave me this job, this apartment, this whole life. What if you were just playing a game and I was too desperate to see it?" "I love you," Kofi said, the words ripping out of him. "I'm in love with you, Amara. That's what this is." She stared at him, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't do this. I can't be with someone when I don't know if it's real. or if I'm just grateful. I can't be the girl who slept her way out of poverty. I need to stand on my own. I need to know I'm worth something without you. She walked out of his office, out of the building, and out of his life. Kofi tried to find her. He called her phone until it went to an automated message saying the number had been disconnected. He went to her apartment, but the landlord said she'd left in the middle of the night, paid up through the end of the month, and disappeared. He checked shelters and soup kitchens and every place he could think of. Nothing. His world crumbled. The success that had once defined him felt meaningless. He'd sit in his empty penthouse and stare at the city lights and feel nothing but a vast, aching emptiness. Nadine watched him with worried eyes, but said nothing. Even she could see that something fundamental had broken in him. It was Nadine who found the notebook. Amara had left it in her desk drawer, probably by accident. Kofi opened it with shaking hands and read her poems, her observations, her thoughts. And there, scattered throughout the pages, were words about him. About a man in a gray suit who'd looked at her like she mattered. About conversations that felt like coming home. About falling in love with someone and being terrified that it couldn't be real. At the back of the notebook, he found an address. Her hometown, a small coastal village 3 hours north. Kofi didn't hesitate. He got in his car and drove through a winter storm. The roads slick with ice and the wind howling around him. He didn't care. He had to find her. The village was tiny, just a handful of streets clustered around a small harbor. He found her at the cemetery, kneeling in front of 2 simple headstones, Kwame and Nia Ose, beloved parents. Amara was wearing her old red coat, the torn one she'd been wearing the first night he saw her, and she was crying. Kofi walked across the frozen grass and knelt beside her. She looked up, shock and pain, and something like hope warring in her eyes. "I'm not here to save you," he said quietly. "I'm here because without you, I'm the one who's lost. You didn't need rescuing, Amara. I did. You taught me what it means to really live, to feel something beyond the next deal or the next dollar. You made me human again. Kofi, I don't care what anyone says. I don't care what the papers write, or what Kioma thinks, or what anyone believes. I know what's in my heart. I love you. Not because I pulled you off the street. Not because I gave you a job. I love you because you're brilliant and brave, and you see the world in ways I never could. I love you because, when I'm with you, I'm the best version of myself." Amara was crying harder now, but she was smiling too. "I love you too," she whispered. "I was so scared it wasn't real, that I was just confused and grateful and—" "It's real," Kofi said, taking her cold hands in his. "It's the most real thing I've ever felt." She kissed him then, there in the snow beside her parents' graves, and it felt like coming home. They didn't rush back to the city. They stayed in that small village for a week, walking on frozen beaches and talking for hours in a tiny bed and breakfast. They talked about what they wanted, really wanted, from life. Amara didn't want to go back to being Kofi's employee. She wanted to build something of her own, something that proved her worth had nothing to do with his money or his connections. Kofi helped her, but this time it was different. He was an investor, nothing more. He put up the capital for a small publishing house that would focus on emerging writers from underrepresented communities. Amara would run it, own it, build it into whatever she dreamed it could be. If it succeeded, she'd pay him back with interest. If it failed, the loss was his to bear. But it would be her company, her vision, her success or failure. 6 months later, Amara's publishing house had released its first collection of poetry. The book sold out in 3 days. Critics called it a fresh, necessary voice in modern literature. Amara was building something real, something that was entirely hers. And Kofi was by her side, not as her savior or her benefactor, but as her partner, her equal. The man she'd chosen to love, not because he'd rescued her, but because he'd seen her for who she really was. They got married on a beach in her hometown, with the winter waves crashing against the shore and snow falling softly around them. It was small and simple and perfect. Nadine stood as Kofi's best woman, crying happy tears into a tissue. A handful of Amara's new authors came to celebrate. There were no society photographers, no headlines, no spectacle. Just two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of places, promising to build a life together. Kofi and Amara proved that love doesn't see bank accounts or addresses. He didn't save her. They saved each other. Sometimes, the person who changes your life forever is standing right in front of you, in the last place you'd ever think to look. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment telling us what you think. Do you believe in unexpected love? And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that will restore your faith in humanity. Thank you for watching, and remember, love finds you when you least expect it.